Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CIFAL York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the first session of the Sustainable Economic Growth and Prosperity Speaker Series with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Takaranto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event and our participants may be joining from various locations, I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our speaker and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. For those who may not be familiar with CIFAL York, our center was established in 2020 and started its operations in 2021. CIFAL York was created in collaboration between the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, or UNITAR, and York University with York Region to develop and deliver training and knowledge sharing, as well as capacity building programs across 5 focus areas, which are disaster risk, emergency management, and humanitarian actions, health development, environment, and climate change, entrepreneurship, digital technology, and economic development, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Without further ado, as I will also be serving as a moderator this session, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Alia Abbas. Alia Abbas is an award-winning economic development professional with over 8 years of experience in the field. She is the recent winner of the International Top 40 Under 40 Award for Economic Developers. She was selected for the 2023 award for her work in advocacy in economic development. She was invited to Tucson, Arizona, where she was granted this award by the CEO, International Economic Development Council, or IEDC, Nathan Ole, and CEO Julie Curtin of Development Consultants International. Alia is the CEO and founder of Alia Consulting Economic Development Firm based in Toronto. Her firm focuses on business continuity and economic recovery initiatives. She worked as the investment attraction consultant for USA East for Toronto Global. She worked with Toronto Global to develop their new supply chain, onshoring, resilience, and expansion, or SCORE program. She is also an active member of both the International Economic Development Council and the Economic Developers Council of Ontario. Alia, thank you very much for being with us today for opening the session. Or for the opening session, sorry. And I very much look forward to your presentation. The floor is yours. Oh, sorry, just wanted to let you know you're on mute.
Myself. Okay, thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone taking time out of their day today to join me on this session. So as Francesco had mentioned, I have done a lot of work around economic development. So this is a topic that's close to my heart, but also close to home in terms of projects I've worked on. So for today's series, or for the lecture series that we have following and ongoing, we're looking at empowered economies, and we're trying to look at where do you incorporate sustainable development, United Nations SDG goals within economic development and entrepreneurship and lens. And the reason why we're gathered here today is to understand the importance of adding that sustainability piece within our initiatives that we see with our municipalities, our regions, even countries. I understand that SDGs, like the Sustainable Development Goals that United Nations has put forward, there's 17. Not every country is able to achieve each goal. There is a push for it. There is an ambition towards, achieving these goals, or at least meeting certain criteria of each goal. However, when it comes to the work of economic development, it's not as easy and to incorporate in our strategy plans for our municipalities, but also in terms, even as an economic development professional individually, like, what goals do I want to focus on? And that depends on your, let's say, the projects you work on, the initiatives you take, and that will kind of help you understand your goal, your alignment, and your vision for your community. In the chat box, I encourage everyone to kind of share their contact information if you have any questions coming along, because I, as a speaker, I prefer to have that one-on-one engagement. So I do have a very short slide put together, and that is because I want to create this more of an interactive engagement piece for us to kind of discuss as a group. So for today's agenda, it's pretty small, just providing you that overview and background, and then the economic development piece, because I want to get my audience to understand the work that we do, but also how does it go back to the fact of SDGs? What does that mean? What does sustainable development mean? Because I feel like if I were to ask everyone in the room, what do they define as sustainable development? It's going to be a totally different answer. And I understand that. And I think that's where that collaborative piece, that partnership comes along, right? Because everyone has a different experience. They come from different countries. Everyone's literally a global citizen when it comes to this concept. You know, we all have different experiences, different projects, different jobs that we do that help, you know, kind of steer our, let's say, directions and what projects you want to take on. And then I want to talk about actions moving forward, and also the fact that this is a series. There's other topics that will come up that my counterpart, Dana, will be covering next week as well. So you guys can kind of build on this knowledge of what does economic development mean, what does sustainable development mean from that lens, and then moving forward onto the entrepreneurial side. And then you can have my contact information as well if you have any further questions. So I wanted to provide an overview today. So in terms of economic development, I feel like a lot of the times we're misinterpreted as economists. We're people that we provide trends on stocks or investments. I feel like we do have that. We do build upon that knowledge as well from our economist friends. However, our work is slightly different. I think we are more aligned with urban development folks. So from people from urban planning. Urban planners or city planners, rural planners, just planners in general, the field itself, it's more about community development, building your city, building your town, where certain buildings should be, should not be. That's depend on policies, that depends on your land use policies, that's also dependent on zoning bylaws, that, you know, this land is only built for residential development. And that does have a sustainability piece as well, because we're trying to sustain not only the land that we're developing on, but we're trying to sustain the community, right? And I can talk to you further about this. So for economic development, just going in terms of historically back, in terms of the career and where the direction we're going to go today with this topic of how you empower your economies around this, is looking at the concept of economic development being a part of urban planning. So it's a branch off of that. So urban planning is quite old in terms of its profession in the industry. Economic development is quite new, okay? It came across like 1970s, 1980s. That is a pretty, for me, I feel like it's a new field. Like, you know, it's still developing. There's still areas that we're trying to figure out in terms of how do we offer better services as economic development professionals. So where do we fall into that category? So in urban planning, there is that inquiry that comes in. So let's say you are interested in developing a town, a building within in the town you are, you're a new business owner, and you're like, you know, I'm looking for a space to be. The planner will help you with that. But the individual that walks you through that whole process is the economic development office. So you may not know you've bumped into an economic developer because sometimes the title throws them off in terms of what they call themselves. Sometimes they're called business development officers. Sometimes they're called entrepreneurship leadership staff. So they're working out of the business enterprise center. The other function is that they sometimes work within the planning department. So if it's in a rural community, you're going to have two people, right? There's the planner and then there's the economic developer. The economic developer usually tends to come out when there's a business deal that's about to happen. So for the field of economic development, on business development, business growth. So we're very happy. We're the kind of the front runners, the front people in terms of when a business is here, we're here to welcome them. We're here to like support them on any needs they have. So we're in the process of the well-being and the quality of life piece, right? Because I feel like once you have brought in a new business into a community, or even having a local business, like a local resident establish a business in the community, there is that whole quality of life piece, because They're going to be locally, anchored in your community. They're going to be there for quite some time. They're going to put out job postings for individuals to get hired. And that keeps the sense of quality of life for people, because that maybe some people want to relocate back to that community, right? Because they're like, I don't want to commute from XYZ town, or let's just say from Toronto, I want to come to Milton, where I currently work. Some people tend to relocate. So there's the attraction piece in that. So when we're looking at economic development, I just want to keep you to understand in like kind of 4 buckets, okay? So the first bucket, it would be kind of looking at targeted efforts. So what we're trying to look at is create jobs. That's our goal. We usually align ourselves with the mayor's office, and we kind of look at their mandate. And a lot of the times, and the reason why we align ourselves with the mayor's office is because they're the ones that kind of put out for election time to get elected. They kind of have a set target that we want to bring in X amount of jobs in our community. We want to create business growth, because that helps them with their votes. That helps them with, let's say, bringing that credibility to the community. So sometimes some mayors are very memorable. One example I could give to my hometown mayor, which is City of Mississauga, former Hazel McCallion. She achieved that a lot through economic development work. She's been recognized to the International Economic Development Council for the work that she's contributed for business development. So where does that take us? So in efforts of job creation, there's 2 areas that we kind of put ourselves in, which is the BRE, business retention and expansion, and then the FDI piece, which is the foreign direct investment piece. So for BRE as a unit, what we try to do is look at their local businesses, look at what their needs are. Sometimes the questions from inquiries that we get from our local businesses that, Alia, like I need help in expansion, but the place that I'm expanding is a flood zone. I cannot further develop on that land because its potential is going to cause flooding. So I want to relocate within your community. That's where I, as a BRE professional, will help them out. Even though I'm in economic development, we also do wear different hats. We specialize in different areas. A lot of the times, the rural economic developers define themselves as individuals that specialize in general economic development. So they have a bit of understanding about the infrastructure and real estate. They have a bit of understanding of BRE work, which is business retention and expansion. And then there's the foreign direct investment piece. Now, where does BRE and FDI come together is definitely the BRE piece, where the local businesses are telling me what their needs are. Sometimes they also may mention that, you know what, Alia, I'm thinking of expanding because I'm getting certain products from China, from India, and I would love to create a second head office there. That is where the FDI piece will come in, the foreign direct investment piece. Or it could be reverse as well, where an Indian company is saying, you know what, I'm interested in expanding to Canada, more specifically to Milton. How can I do that? That's where we would kind of help them. So these are our targeted efforts. The second piece is the layer. Once we have welcomed that business to our community, we help them establish. The second piece that kind of helps businesses kind of make their decision in the first part is the workforce development piece, which is looking at job creation. So they try to look at demographics in terms of hiring talent. This is where we kind of work with our local universities and colleges and tell them that, you know what, there is that talent. We have X graduates in engineering. If it's a software engineering company and they want to come here, we tell them that we have X computer engineering students graduating from Waterloo, from University of Toronto. And this is the demographic that you will kind of gear towards in hiring, possibly as your future employees. So a lot of the times for Canada, our biggest piece when it comes to investments is looking at our talent. Our education is our biggest win, okay, because of the affordable education system that we have and the fact that we have a lot of talented international professionals coming in. So for Canada, we're a very educated population. And then for province of Ontario specifically, we have 21 universities and colleges, right? So that's a huge potential for a company that's coming in and wanting to hire talent and wanting to, let's say, not even hire, sometimes improve their employees' education by, further education credentials. This is where we kind of build those avenues. So workforce development comes into this play as well when it comes to economic development. The third thing is community development. This is where I was mentioning that we work with different partners. We have different partners in the city of planning. We work with our local business improvement areas. So to give you an idea of business improvement areas in your community is when you're walking down Chinatown in Toronto, or Little Italy, these little ethnic neighborhoods that we have, let's say close to 100 plus businesses, these are actual business improvement areas. These are businesses that have decided that we'll all come together because we're all in close proximity. We're in this neighborhood. We would love to work together as an association. So they kind of developed their own board. This is where we kind of help them with their community development piece. So sometimes certain cities become memorable for this. So City of Toronto, City of Vancouver have made themselves memorable through their ethnic neighborhoods or business improvement areas because of the popularity, because of the food, the culture, and just the fact that there's so many languages spoken in our communities. So this is where, as an economic developer, we would look at the community development piece, helping our local residents establish new businesses within these communities sometimes, or these neighborhoods, but that creates economic prosperity. Now, when it comes to economic development work, nowadays, especially, I feel like the pandemic has kind of expedited this conversation, even though I don't want to live in that whole phase of, we're stuck in the pandemic, the COVID-19, but it is a reality at the end of the day. So this is why when we're looking at, at CIFAL York, we're looking at the pillar of disaster emergency management, and then the second pillar being economic development, entrepreneurship, digital technologies. There is an alignment there. Because when we're looking at disaster and emergency management piece, there is always that conversation about when's the next disaster? When is it going to be? A lot of the times, it's not always going to be a natural disaster. Sometimes I feel like a disaster could be in the form of a business deciding to leave your community because of the support they have not received. Or because of a major disaster, they cannot fully operate. So this is where that piece of sustainability and looking at sustainability from an economic lens is very crucial, because we want to make sure that the businesses we invite over to our community stay in our community. We do not want to create leakage where, let's say, another opportunity for another community kind of poach our business and say, you know what? They're always going to be prone to floods. Come to our community. We actually have better insurance policies, but better, geographic positioning, and in terms of our land use policies that can help you establish your business and not close down for X amount of months or weeks because of a flood. So when we look at additional piece of sustainability, this is a layer that it doesn't impact every economic development officer, but as we see with natural disasters becoming quite frequent, but it's not damaging in terms of death tolls, it's damaging towards infrastructure. This impacts our work on a day-to-day basis, because now we're kind of having those conversations around where do we find our next location for our business to come, and how can we keep them in our community and not have them leave after the next flood were to hit our community. So when we're looking at sustainable development in terms of this concept, and the reason why I'm kind of giving you guys these breakdowns of these terms is not because I'm trying to help you educate you, like, oh, this is what this term means. What I'm trying to get at is that these are key terms that we use in our day-to-day work as an economic development professional, and the person across the street would not know. So this is why I'm trying to break it down as individuals, as educational piece, that what do we look at sustainable development? Because I'm pretty sure if you were to ask an environmental scientist, what does a sustainable development mean? They'll give you a totally different definition, versus if you were to ask an economic developer or a planner, it's a totally different definition. So it depends on the industry, the expertise, the professional that you're speaking to, and the work that they do day to day. So for us, as in terms of our approach, is that we're trying to look at as a development piece, we're trying to often looking at needs awareness of environmental, social, and economic limitations that we face in our society. And the thing is, environmental is a huge piece for us right now, because when it comes to business investments, they are looking at possible lands that are suitable for them to kind of build from the ground up, or try to repurpose the building that is currently already there. This is another piece that I'll kind of engage on when we look at the economic development side. So what we're trying to look at for sustainable development as an economic development lens is the environmental protection, ensuring that the businesses that we invite to our community does not, limit the amount of pollution, the resources and, looking at possible renewable energy, right? There's a lot of push towards the government in terms of looking at ESG, circular economy. What does that mean, right? Because a lot of these terms are just thrown around willy-nilly and people are not aware of it, right? Because it's a term that we don't use often. I feel like when we use the term the pandemic or COVID-19 nowadays, anyone from the, from the public to the government, everyone understands what we're talking about. But sometimes when it comes to the economic development profession, we are not as engaged, let's say, with the public as we are with the business community. Right? The business community is kind of like our way to kind of engage with the public saying, hey, we're gonna bring in this company. What are your thoughts? And that's where we have those town hall meetings. That's where sometimes your counselor will go door to door and ask about your input or your insight on this development that's taking place. And that's where sometimes a lot of these conversations around environmental protection come up, because some people are like, you know what? They're developing right next door to me, and that's a park. I rather see it as a park and keep it as a park. I don't want it to kind of be bulldozed and be built into a warehouse or another business, right? Because they're thinking of the protection of the environment. And that's where we have conversation with the conservation and heritage people as well. That's another debate for another day and another conversation, but that kind of helps us look at economic growth. So what we're trying to look at is job creation, as I mentioned. I think if we were to say 3 things that economic developers do is job creation, job creation, job creation. So basically our bottom line is to bring in jobs. But the jobs we want to create, we want to also now put a sustainable lens on it. And I feel like a lot of this push has been coming from the businesses themselves, where a lot of businesses are seeing pressures from the government to look at greener initiatives. So this is where they're trying to look at, you know what, I may want to hire someone that's more understanding of what does sustainable development mean? What does it look like for our business, and how we can look at our initiatives and making our targets. This is where we look at social inclusion. So we're trying to look at equitable access to resources and opportunities and supporting community well-being. The reason why I'm mentioning the social inclusion part is because there's a lot of groups that are sometimes not a part of the conversation, or sometimes they're not left out. It's just that we ourselves are not thinking about them until we start the process of development, until we start engaging in certain areas. And I'll explain later on as to what I mean by that in terms of social inclusion, and kind of put that hat on when you're thinking about economic development and what does sustainable development mean for yourself. As when it comes to economic development and UN SDGs, in terms of this concept that we're talking about today, is that we're trying to look at the global goals, the 17. I'm not going to go through all 17 today. That's a huge undertaking. But the thing is, when we later on talk about the different topics leading on to our leadership and then our course, it's going to give you an opportunity to think, oh, okay, this is how I would incorporate an SDG, let's say number 8 or number 9, in my community development process. So when we're looking at our SDGs, I feel like there's an opportunity for kind of dividing, creating a blueprint for us in our life. So in terms of our initiatives, what we're looking at in terms of growth is that we're trying to look at how can we create a more sustainable future. As I had mentioned, when you're bringing in a company, you want to ensure that it stays in your community, but it's also not creating pollution in your community. It's not becoming an opportunity where it's creating your community to not in a bad way, but like let's say a dumping ground, right? And we do see that sometimes with certain advanced manufacturing companies that do kind of reside in communities. They need a place to kind of deposit their leftover products or development of equipment, right? So that's where we're trying to look at circular economy as again. So I feel like a way to describe the concept of circular economy in terms of the term, I feel like it's looking at a product from start to finish. So from the time I decide and the products I plan to use to create my product, so let's say, for example, this water bottle, right? I'm going to use plastic, I'm going to use the lid, and I'm going to resource the water from somewhere. How am I going to do that? I need to look at the origin of the plastic that I'm going to be creating to kind of my water in, right? So I have to look at, will this product initially where I'm getting it from, where I'm getting it sourced from, is the product itself or the company that I'm working with sourcing it in a productive way that's, let's say, not using sweatshops, not using child labor laws. Those are things that will impact my decision about what products or plastics I tend to use. Also, I want to look at environmental, like, is it good for me to use a plastic bottle? No, not really, because we have discovered that plastic is contributing to waste and further, pollution in our community. So in terms of that, when I'm looking at SDGs and circular economy, I want to look at the product from the time I design it all the way to the end of the product, meaning when I dispose of it. So is that going to impact my community? So that's where I feel like it's a way for you to kind of put a concept to what circular economy is, from the life cycle of the product to the end of the product. In terms of economic development, when it comes to our SDG goals, what we're trying to look at is kind of these 5 goals here that I have written in terms of goal 8, which is the decent work and economic growth. So we're trying to find equitable work for groups that, don't usually get hired or having struggled to find the right job, and then decent work in terms of that it actually becomes the minimum wage. It's not like you're being underpaid or being paid under the table. That's not decent work. That's how I define it. So in terms of economic growth, we want to look at how do we create jobs that are sufficient for our community and for the people that are living in our community. For goal 9 is industry innovation and infrastructure. Now, this is the piece that where I feel like on a day-to-day basis as an economic development professional, we engage with businesses a lot. So they're the businesses that kind of invite us for business, site visits. And that's where we kind of discover sometimes their new innovative products that they're developing, and then how we can help them further. Because sometimes they're like, you know what, I have this idea and I would love to go to a trade show. I would love to, partner with another company similar to mine that can help me, further the development of my product. So how could I look at the innovation piece? And then, as I mentioned, infrastructure. So a lot of the times we have businesses that say, you know what, I have kind of met my needs with this business facility, this building specifically, and I would love to expand. Where can I go? A lot of the times when it comes to our community development, especially in the Toronto region, we have seen that, there's not much space to kind of look at green development. Green investments. Green investments is like a field or greenfield investment. Also, basically a field of green grass that has been untouched. And we really don't have that much in Toronto, right? We have a lot of brownfields, which is contaminated sites or sites that have been preoccupied by a former business owner, and then they have left that building as vacant. So the infrastructure piece comes into that, where we're trying to look at, where is the possible housing for a new business and what business could be a part of that building facility, because not every business facility is going to be welcoming. So one example I could provide is looking at a dry cleaner or a laundry facility. So if that business were to close down, I have to try to find a business that's similar to a dry cleaning business because of the residue, because of the certain equipment that they use at the building facility, but also underneath the ground, there is certain level of production, and also looking at waste management that is considered for dry cleanings that is only can be repurposed by a similar business like them. Same as a gas station, right? Sometimes a lot of the conversations has been like, let's transform this gas station into a residential condo. There's a lot of different discussions around that as well, because technically if you have a former gas station, that gas is still there. It's going to remain there. It doesn't go anywhere. So how do we repurpose that? So that's where we kind of look at our environmental associations, that's where we look at our environmental team and our municipality to kind of provide us that insight as to how can we repurpose this? So when we look at goal 9, we're thinking in that sense of kind of repurposing, looking at businesses, looking at innovative ideas of how to support our businesses. For goal 11, sustainable cities and communities. This is a very ambitious goal when it comes to our communities, because sometimes a community would just say, I'm sustainable. How, where, when? And a lot of the times they only have one component, which is sometimes a business in our community that is very sustainable because of the products they're using is very green. Or they're hiring green employees. What does green employees mean? Well, it's hiring professionals that are in the area of understanding environmental initiatives, policies that can support them with their development. So when we're looking at sustainable cities and communities for this goal, this is where it's complicated, because how can you as a community say you're sustainable? What makes you sustainable? And I think that's the issue that a lot of economic development professionals want to incorporate in their strategy, but it's going to take a lot of work to do it and achieve it. In terms of goal 12, responsible consumption and production, I feel like you could use this as your example of understanding the circular economy concept, right? The process of how responsible are you with the production of your goods, the disposal of certain products or contaminated products, and the production of it too, right? In terms of goal 13, climate action is something that we all have to achieve. So in terms of municipalities, we all want to kind of look at greenhouse emissions, looking at our carbon footprint, reducing that even as a professional too, like how much we travel, how many initiatives we take in terms of trade shows. This is where I feel like the third piece in terms of how does economic development look at UN SDGs is partnerships. This is where, as an economic developer, I have to create a lot of different relationships with organizations that kind of have that SDG in mind. One example is like the work I'm doing here at York CIFAL. We're trying to educate the public and also the business community about what does it look like? How can you create a strategy around this? And what would be the steps? Even as an entrepreneur, you're a business owner and you would love to start a business, but then there's always going to be that conversation sometimes later on. It would be around, okay, are you sustainable? And then you're going to, as an entrepreneur, question yourself and say, what does that exactly mean for me and my business? And you do not want people to kind of close your business down because of X product is not disposable, or the product is, creates a lot of pollution in the economy. So these are the type of partnerships we want to look at in terms of helping us understand our needs, our initiatives, and our next steps for actions. So one example I could give you in terms of the work I do is that when I'm looking at economic development, I'm looking at businesses coming to my community and how I can welcome them. There is that component where a lot of the businesses are looking at local suppliers, where they're like, you know what, Alia, like I have a supplier that's international, but I want it to be closer to home so I don't have to pay for certain charges at the border. And then just the wait time, right? It will take me 52 weeks to get this product, or sometimes it will take me 30 weeks to get a product over. So those are delays. And a lot of the times we saw that with the pandemic, with a lot of the border closures for transportation and, even at the different borders for Windsor and Niagara, we saw that as well, right? With the trucks, and for railways, for ports as well with the ships. So there were delays in products, and that's where the business communities were coming out and they were saying, you know what, I need help. I have a supplier that's bringing my product in from China. Now, there's a lot of delay, there's a lot of pushback, geopolitical issues that are causing delays in me getting my product, and I'm losing customers. Can you help me achieve this? This is where, I find myself aligning myself with, okay, this is another layer to my work where I'm trying to find professionals that understand this. So who would I reach out to? I reached out to the Supply Chain Canada, Reshoring Canada, another group that I worked with now, which is called the National Institute of Supply Chain Leaders. These are the professionals I would connect with. This is the community that I would connect my businesses to, where I'd be like, you know what? We actually have a community of suppliers that, help you with your product that you're looking for. A lot of the time it's the food and beverage companies that reach out for these type of local supplier relationships because they want to make sure that they stay in the community. It's very competitive in the food and beverage industry. So finding alignment in the work that we do and the work that we create for our businesses helps us kind of understand our SDG aligned projects. And this is where I feel like, in terms of discussion, I want to open the floor for us to kind of engage as an audience about, let me think, what are you thinking in terms of this concept? If you had any questions and, how I could help you further your understanding around this concept. And you can always feel free to contact me at this number, but then I'm more than happy to take on questions now.
Thank you so much, Alia, for the presentation. Yeah, I just want to also encourage those in the audience to ask questions either in the Q&A function or raise your hand. We'll give you permission to talk if you'd rather ask your question out loud or directly to Alia. But right now I'm not seeing any questions, so I guess I just start with one or two that I have just from
Yes.
seeing the presentation. So when you talked about um, making businesses sustainable and encouraging sustainable practices in new businesses as they open up. But sometimes I think some of those practices um, can be a little bit, um, maybe a little bit more expensive than how business was done in the past. So I guess a question I have is kind of how do you balance that as an economic developer who's trying to make the both the community sustainable and innovative and progressive, but with how do you balance that with bringing in or trying to make the community attractive to other businesses where they maybe could go somewhere else that might be a little less expensive or that might not have as many requirements for making the business sustainable.
Yeah, so I feel like when it comes to our, for my work in terms of day-to-day helping businesses, yeah, there is always that question of like, oh yeah, it's not achievable. These green practices, I would love to be a part of it, but it's costly at the end of the day. I can't really afford it. And that's why we have seen conversations around where, suppliers looking at or businesses looking at supplier relationships in China because of the cost and the pricing that they're offering, right? And plus, in terms of them being a leader in a lot of the supplier as being a major supplier for our country, but also for our businesses too. So this is where we try to build relationships, as I had mentioned, right? We try to find local. So as an initiative, one example I could provide to you is that, when during the pandemic, there was a lot of push around, what do we do, with the border closing for Canada and US. There was a lot of relationship building and understanding for us as Canada, as a country, where we're like, oh my God, we only have one country that we border to, and they're closed. And now our certain products and the support that we need for our business community are facing these challenges. And then a lot of the times the companies themselves had kind of addressed that issue too, where they're like, you know what, I choose to go with that product in the US because of the close proximity they had to Mexico. So a lot of our products are actually coming from Mexico to US and then to Canada. So that's where we try to look at, is there a way of us to kind of build a stronger relationship with Mexico in terms of products and bringing our products over the border? So a lot of the times you try to have that conversational piece. I feel like as a business, as an economic development professional, you're basically the yellow pages. Okay. A yellow pages used to be like a book with a list of businesses, and it would tell you all types of businesses. If you wanted a lawnmower service, if you need a nail salon, hair salon, so the thing is, when it comes to our profession itself, we're trying to understand partnerships, trying to find a common ground for our businesses to work together. Obviously, I'm not going to say it's going to happen in a day. This is a whole process. And I feel like now as companies are looking at, the environmental, social, and governance inclusion, the ESG piece, this is very key now because a lot of the businesses themselves, but also because of the new hires that they're having, the employees, this new generation, where everyone wants to be a part of a company and work with a company that's kind of environmental friendly in their production. So this is where I feel like when it comes to our work as an economic developer and the work that we do, we're not trying to push an agenda on the business. We're not telling them what to do. I'm going to tell you one thing that I've learned from a lot of my businesses and from the interactions. Businesses are really well ahead of the game when it comes to government in terms of what changes they need to apply, and they're seeing the changes. I will tell you clearly, as with my work in the foreign direct investment space, when the pandemic was about to occur, or we saw the change in, businesses not wanting to expand, it was because the businesses themselves were telling me this. They're like, we are seeing changes in our supplies. We are seeing a reduction in, certain production of our products. And this is kind of helping us understand that we are not planning on expanding. We're not going to be hiring any new employees at this time. And this is where it's kind of looking at, will we expand to Canada? No, not at this time. So this is where I felt like, wow, the businesses are more understanding and more aware of the trends. And they're the ones that come to us and tell us. This whole concept of finding me a local supplier, it's coming from the business community. They literally told me, Alia, if you can find me a local supplier that I can partner with, then I will think about expanding further in your community. And that kind of made me think, wow, I need to look at possible supply chain groups that I can work with to help this business get a seat at the table so they can negotiate and talk. So when it comes to environmental impact and addressing SDGs, these green initiatives, as I have mentioned earlier on in the presentation, is that it's a very challenging thing to do. As countries, we're not able to achieve all SDG goals, and we have, let's say the countries have trillions and billions of dollars, but they're not able to achieve it. Why? Because it's a slow process. It has to be either we holistically do it all together all at once, or we take it pieces and pieces. And that's where I feel like businesses themselves have kind of begin to phase these strategies out, where certain businesses are like, you know what, I'm just going to focus on the consumption piece. Oh yeah, I'm not going to focus on any other goal. I only care about my product and making sure that it's disposed in an environmentally protective way. And that's where I think a lot of the times we're at the table, we're kind of being the let's say the listening ear. So we're kind of fly on the wall when it comes to business decisions. We're not pushing any businesses to make certain decisions. However, we can be a partner and ally in the conversation. So a lot of the times when there's certain initiatives taking place at the municipality level where we're like, you know what, we're going to go towards more, green development, looking at more sustainable water waste management. Now, this thing is if there's a company that's consuming a lot of water, this is where we would kind of interact with that business and say, you know what, there's a new policy coming in place from our municipality. Are you aware of this? What does that mean for your business down the road? And a lot of the times the businesses themselves will tell us, what direction they want to go in, and we kind of do the hand-holding for that process for them. So I feel like it's a lot of conversations, sit downs, and site visits. Site visits is the number one thing that will tell me where this business is going in terms of how clean their facility is, how productive their employees are, their goals as a community, being a part of our community. And then sometimes even these site visits will tell me why this business is about ixnay out of my town, and be closed the next day. So a lot of the time the conversations is the key part of understanding the green aspect of where they're going. And this is where I'm thinking as an entrepreneurship piece, we have to have these discussions earlier on, not after a major disaster, not after a major closure where we have to say, oh yeah, did you think about that? I think now as a business development piece, when you're thinking about your business, think about the exit strategy, the succession strategy, and incorporate the green planning initiatives within that too. Right? So how will my business be in the next, 2030, 2040 vision? And does it align with where the world or the city and community is going?
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the in-depth answer. And for covering, I think you covered a lot of the bases really well. So thank you very much. I do have a couple of maybe follow-ups, but there is a question in from the audience, so I'll get to that first. And again, I'll encourage anyone who's watching right now to ask questions, raise your hand if you'd like. But yeah, we'll start with this question from Abid Gozar. I hope I'm saying that right. Sorry if I'm not. So I say they're a development practitioner focusing on governance, accountability, and advocacy. So their question is, what type of policies help local business to be more environmentally and economically sustainable? It's a two-part question. So they say they're also learning about supply chain and sustainable development. And so can you please connect them with resources which can help them learn more about this topic?
Okay, so I'll go from the second question to the first one, because as I feel like it builds onto it. So in terms of resources, Abid, I would mention, in terms of the National Institute for Supply Chain Leaders, they have a lot of, events that take place. There's coffee chats that I even host locally too, at different communities. I do one for Mississauga, for Milton. And the thing is, from those coffee chats, let's say those are events where you can participate. You can meet with local suppliers. You'll hear from business professionals on the ground that are day-to-day working in this space, understand the challenges that they're looking at and how the government's supporting. one thing I do want to mention is that, it comes to different provinces for Canada too, right? I think majority of our green initiatives or green policies or policies around disaster emergency management come from communities in the provinces of BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan. Now, the reason why I'm saying these three provinces specifically is because of the conversations that were taking place, right? A lot of the West Coast experiences more because of their geographical positioning with like wildfires, floods, earthquakes, tsunamis. They're more equipped to that. They're more aware. So this is where their businesses are kind of looking at environmentally economic sustainable development in a different lens versus the East Coast, which is where we are, which is looking at Ontario and Quebec. We're in a very good, let's say, position geographically where, yeah, we do see sometimes the power outage, the once in a blue moon type flood. But the thing is, when it comes to looking at environmental perspective, this is something that I think it has to be coming from the provincial government. It has to be coming from the federal level of government, looking at climate policy, looking at climate change and an understanding of what climate change means for the business community specifically. In terms of understanding supply chain sustainable development, I feel like as Canada as a whole, we have not really have, let's say, incentives in place for this. This is something that we do have, like, for the whole different visa processing and inviting companies, but we don't have as many incentives or tax breaks for green initiatives as, let's say, the United States. And that's because every state has their own way of going about it, and that's where their companies are kind of geared towards. We're like, oh, we're going to get tax breaks. In Canada, we can't do that. We can't say you're going to get this much money back. We do now have that with, our carbon tax, right? Where that is something that we're trying to look at, more greener initiatives and looking at, how people are looking at their carbon footprint as a business owner, and then trying to give it back to the community. As we're looking at, moving forward in terms of supply chain sustainable development, I would definitely encourage you to look at our provinces individually, because that will tell you a totally different story around, where Canada is headed and where we see ourselves in terms of business growth and business development. And that is because, every province has its own attributes, its own sectors that they focus on. But as I had mentioned, the food and beverage sector is the one that's highly impacted by this, the agricultural sector as well, where they're seeing these limitations on supply chain, new food production, how do we get certain goods over? That's where, Alberta and BC are kind of spearheading those conversations because of their geographic positioning and because of the environmental situations that they have been put through or have seen in the past. So looking at possible lesson learned, right? Another, in terms of looking at supply chain and sustainable development, another thing I wanted to look at was not only reshoring Canada as a group, there's a reshoring initiative. So reshoring initiative is the one that kind of spearheaded this whole reshoring Canada initiative on our end, where we were looking at, as always, our US partners. And we were trying to look at, like, what is US doing? How are they doing? How are they adapting to the different changes in supply, in goods? Because to be honest, I feel like US is kind of sandwiched between Canada and Mexico. So they got the talent piece at the top of the bun, and the bottom of the bun is like, finding the cheaper resources, labor, partnerships is through Mexico. The talent is wonderful there. The environment in terms of, certain costs, it kind of, helps them benefit as, United States as a whole, because they're right in dead center. So any products that come from Mexico to Canada, they have to go through the US. There's no way about it, right? So I feel like when it comes to United States, it's a good example of looking at how does a country manage itself sustainably in terms of resources. How do they look at their supply chain cycle? How do they have their relationships with Canada versus Mexico? And then how does it have like a whole strategy in terms of North America? Where are we headed? And I feel like sustainable development is a lot to do with, if we were to look at Mexico as an example, and that is because Mexico is a leader around this concept. Even if I were to say, I can boldly say, if there were to be like a dome be built around Mexico, they're very sustainable in terms of their suppliers, because they have a really strong sustainability strategy around that they're able to bring those connections with their local suppliers, that they don't require any outside assistance. They're a very good competitor in country-wise in terms of China and Mexico. They're the next competitor in terms of leading for supply chain or looking at cost-effective strategies. Mexico is a leader in that space. So I feel like looking at different countries, and then for Canada, looking at our different policies from our different provinces around their supply chain strategies and their disaster emergency strategies, because there is that business development piece in there. So how quickly is a business able to be up and running again after a major disaster will tell you how good that community is. Second, I think is one example that I could give you as a business. You may want to look at the waffle index. Now, the waffle index is because there's a Waffle House index. So if you're familiar with the restaurant Waffle House, it's, it has a history of like, being a business that is like, prone to be in areas that are, let's say, underserved communities. However, after a major disaster, the Waffle House are the ones that are up and running. And that's why there's an index. So if you have a Waffle House in that community, and if it's up and running within 24 hours, that means that community is back up in business. It's more resilient, it's more sustainable. There's an actual article piece that I have written on the Waffle Index that I can share with you, Waffle House Index, to be correct. But this is a way for you to understand how business, looking at its local suppliers, looking at its strategy, is being able to be so resilient that even during a disaster such as a hurricane or a tsunami, is still up and running. That is a way for us to kind of engage as a community too. How can a community be up and running and not shut down its services? And I feel like a lot of the times our economic development staff were either too small of a group to take on that initiative, where, and from a rural community's perspective, because there's a lot of inquiries coming in. But I feel like as an economic development professional, we need to understand how can we bounce back after a major incident, such as the pandemic, such as any disaster that takes place, or even a major employer leaving our community. How can we kind of build our community back through talent, through finding another, business that can come in and replace that current employer that just left? I hope that answers your question, Abid.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you, Abid, for the question. Thank you, Alia, for that detailed answer again. We do have a few more minutes left, and I'm not seeing any other questions from the audience. But I do also have a question, I guess, also somewhat related to policy, but more on the end of like the city side, I guess. So like you mentioned ways to make a community kind of attractive to businesses, where you talked about, highlighting the strengths of the colleges or universities that are there. Oh, sorry, I just said Abid mentioned that. Thank you for the great response. So thank you, Abid, for the question, and I'm glad that that the response answered it, answered what you were looking for. But yeah, so you mentioned things like that, like highlighting the fact that there's good education in particular fields from a town or surrounding towns, good infrastructure, things like that. But so I guess my question is kind of like, what kind of policies can or do you put in place to make a community more attractive to businesses, and how do you kind of market that, or how do you make that known to business, especially like international businesses that may not have heard of Milton before? It's a smaller town. Well, I mean, it's a city, but like it's not as known as like Toronto or Ottawa or Vancouver or Montreal. So how do you put your towns or cities or communities like that on the map with policies, and how do you make that known to people who might not be aware of those places?
Yes. So the way I would go about it, especially for like rural communities, right, where they're always thinking of ways to interact through new policies to make themselves stand out. I don't think it always is around the policy. It's more around the support. So the initiatives from the economic development strategy that you have in place, right? So there is that quota that we have to meet as, as an economic development department about bringing X businesses for the year end of 2024. Or, by 2025, we need to be able to have this many events in place for us to do trade missions or even travel to businesses or do site visits. I feel like the way that we kind of get ourselves on the map as an economic development department, being known for that type of work, is through our business community. As I had mentioned earlier, is through the site visits, right? Me bringing those natural relationships with the business owner, understanding their needs, helping them, supporting them, is what will get me that credibility, is what will get me recognized. So when a foreign business is coming in, the number one thing they do, they're doing research on me heavily through my website, looking at my community, looking at me as a professional, in terms of achievements, like what has this person do? Are they credible in the space of economic development? Do they know economic developers? And then in terms of the organization itself, like how successful have they been with helping businesses? So they're always looking at the new business news channel, right? That will tell you how many businesses have grown. Is there any, opportunities for me to kind of get engaged? But then they're looking at our local champions. I call them local champions because our businesses that are currently in our community are the ones that are going to tell our story for our community, and they're going to tell a story about me. They'll be like, Alia is a good, economic development professional because she does touch base with me. They're a really good helping staff. That is a kudos to our team, but also the work I do. But that's also painting a picture for a new business that's coming in that, wow, okay, if I'm in this community, these people will help me. These people are not going to leave me, or close the door on me and just be MIA for a bit, right? While I'm going through, some challenges in the community. So I feel like the policy, let's say it is somewhat of a policy in terms of your governance style, your leadership style, who your mayor is, who you elect. And I feel like that is very crucial when it comes to leadership, is who are you electing to be your premier, to be your prime minister, to be your mayor? These are very, and like local councillor, because these are the people that are going to advocate what happens in your community, what happens in your country, what happens in your province, and certain policies that are put through for economic development. It may not blatantly say it's an economic development strategy, but it does apply somewhat in a way to economic development because of the businesses we're bringing in. So I think in terms of policies, it's more so looking at the economic development piece, right? When you're looking at, I'm going to bring in 10 businesses, how? I'm going to achieve it through making those interactions, making those warm introductions to my local businesses and having those strong relationships. You want to do active involvement through site visits, actively meeting with them, checking in on the business, and having that, handoffs in terms of, what, if I'm not here and you want to have a representation, this is my other staff member, this is who I can talk in the business community to. And then also working with your local chambers, board of trades, these are also your champions too, in terms of looking at how a business can engage and improving that interaction and relationship with the business. So in terms of policies, I would say your governance is huge. It's a huge play aspect. And then in terms of your strategy down the road, what does your 5-year strategy look like for the business community from the ECDEV side? Because your local champions are the ones that are going to make and break your community, to be honest. Because if your businesses are closing down every year, it's a clear sign that there's something wrong, and it has to do with, your government style. Like maybe they're not as interactive with the businesses as they thought they were. So that's what I feel like it would be the best answer for your question.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, no, that was perfect. Yeah, so we're at 1 o'clock. So just for the sake of time, I think that's pretty much all we have time for today. But thank you so much for that presentation and for all those very detailed answers. And thank you for taking the time to be here. And thank you as well to everyone in the audience. Thank you for asking questions, and thank you for being here and taking the time to join us today. And yeah, and thank you, of course, for being here for the first session. So thank you very much. And just as a reminder, this will be a monthly series. So it'll be on the second Wednesday of every month. So our next session will be on September 11th with Dana Chakra, who will be presenting excuse me, who are presenting on that day. So yeah, I invite everybody to mark that on their calendar. And if you enjoyed the session today, and Dana's presentation will be focusing more on entrepreneurship side of economic development and sustainability. So if that is of interest to you, please mark that on your calendars. Um, Share the sessions or the series with people in your network who might find it useful or interesting. Registration is always open and free. It'll be open. It's a 5 series session, so it'll be open until the very last session. So people can join in um, throughout the series as well. And as a final reminder as well, the session and all the sessions in this series are going to be recorded and will be up on our YouTube channel. So if you want to come back and reference any of the material that was presented today or that will be presented in the future, you can always find that on our YouTube channel if you just search CIFAL York on YouTube. So with that, just one last big thank you to everybody for being here today. And of course, again, to you, Alia, for that great presentation. And yeah, with that, I think we can end there.
All right. Thank you, everyone.